episode of Bad Takes in Football. I am your host, Bad Takes. Excited to get into this Week 2 slate. We'll obviously be starting out with the Thursday night football game between the Commanders and the Packers. But before I do that, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Also hit that live button. Let's see how many people we can get in here talking about these matchups. Excited to get into this. We'll be diving into this shortly. Again, I prompted the chat below. Let's see how many people we can get in chat here today. Tell me about the matchup that you're actually most excited to see this week. I think Thursday is going to be an exciting matchup. We'll get into that, but there's also a couple other matchups that I think are going to be really exciting between potential playoff teams. So we'll dive into that. But like I said, let's start out with Thursday night football. Commanders at Packers. Now, right off the bat, Green Bay is favored in this game by 3.5 points. And let me tell you, I'm really excited about this matchup for a couple different reasons, but mainly because Jaden Daniels and Jordan Love are two of the highest risers in the NFL right now in the quarterback position. I love Jaden Daniels and Jordan Love. I think both of these quarterbacks have the chance in 3-4 years to be considered the top quarterbacks in the league, probably behind Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, but they're going to be right up there. Now, talking a little bit more about this matchup, it's really interesting to me the fact that we're about to see the youngest team in the Green Bay Packers face off against the oldest team in the Washington Commanders. Now, right off the bat for me, the thing that I'm thinking about the most is it isn't always best to be the oldest team in the NFL, but at the same time, this is really early on in the season, and so the Commanders aren't dealing with the bumps and bruises that you would be seeing if this was a mid-season or later season game. So I really do actually think that this might be an advantage for the Commanders from that perspective. I think both Jordan Love and Jaden Daniels are also going to be slinging the ball down the field this game a lot. I'm expecting both of these quarterbacks to be topping over 250 yards and probably over 2 touchdowns each in this game. Both teams are coming off of a lot of confidence with wins they had last week. The Green Bay Packers beat in-division rivals, the Detroit Lions, while the Commanders were able to topple the New York Giants in a pretty easy game. The other aspects of this game that I'm really interested to see is what do these run games look like? Last game, I would say both Green Bay and the Commanders didn't necessarily get huge production from their top running backs. Josh Jacobs had 66 yards on the ground. He did get a touchdown, but this was off of 19 carries. So 19 carries, he was averaging 3.5 yards per carry last week. Against the Washington Commanders, who have a pretty stout defensive line, I expect there to be similar production out of Josh Jacobs. But to me, they're probably hoping for more out of Green Bay, and I expect them to run Josh Jacobs at least another 19, probably 20 carries in this game. Now, on the other side of this, Ja'Cory Crosby-Merritt, the 7th-round pick for the Washington Commanders, who seemingly is going to be the RB1 for the Commanders moving forward after they traded Brian Robinson, he had a pretty solid game. He had 82 yards and a touchdown, so he was averaging actually 8.2 yards per carry because he only carried the ball 10 times last game. Now, they also have Eckler, who didn't have a good game, in my opinion, and I expect that to be an actual pattern going forward for the Commanders. I really do think they see Crosby-Merritt as the guy in Washington, and Eckler could be an option for third down passing situations. He is most known for his receiving abilities. And so, again, I expect Crosby-Merritt again to get the brunt of the carries, or I should say the majority of the carries in this game. Again, going back to Josh Jacobs, for me, he's going to need to get more than 66 yards a carry in this game for the Green Bay Packers to be successful. And I do think we will actually see that in this game. The Detroit Lions defense is probably better than the Commanders defense in my opinion. And again, this game will be in Green Bay. This will be in front of a large crowd. And again, everyone's excited about this game because of the matchup between Jordan Love and Jaden Daniels. Thursday Night Football, everyone is watching this game. And I expect both Jaden Daniels and Jordan Love to shine. One of my biggest questions in this game is going to be, how does Micah Parsons' back feel? He was able to play in week 1 against the Lions. He got a sack in that game, but generally there's a lot of dings and bruises that come with regular season games, especially. He didn't get the majority of the pass rushing plays, I would say, but I expect those numbers to rise if his back is feeling okay. Now, another aspect that I think is going to be really interesting in this game is, how do the Commanders use Deebo Samuel? I talked about the fact that Krosky Merritt is their number 1 running back. I'm actually thinking they're going to use Deebo Samuel a fair amount in the run game as well. One of his most prolific plays that you see Deebo Samuel running is like an end around or like a jet sweep. He runs those very regularly, and he's very successful with them. He waits for his blocks, he has really good vision, and he's really hard to tackle. And so if he's able to get to, the second level, third level against the Green Bay defense, it's going to be really hard to bring Deebo Samuel down. What do you guys think about this matchup? Do you think the Commanders are going to win this game, or the Green Bay Packers win this game? I actually see the Packers winning this game, but again, it comes down to a lot of factors. For me, I'm also curious, how does Jaden Daniels' wrist look in this game? Right? I talked about the fact that I think Jaden Daniels and Jordan Love will be over 250 yards and probably 2 touchdowns. But again, the Packers have a really good pass rush. I talked about Micah Parsons before. I think that they're going to have a lot of trouble on that Commanders offensive line keeping Jaden Daniels upright. He is a really good running quarterback, and I bet he's going to be able to get away from the rush a fair amount, but I do expect him to be under pressure a lot, because he got sacked 3 times, again, against the Giants defense, who has a really good pass rush, but didn't necessarily get the production that I was expecting. In this game, right now, I'm actually predicting the Packers to win this game. I think it's going to be a close game, but I think it's going to be 31-27. Some other interesting aspects of this game that I'm really curious about is Jayden Reed going to be healthy for this game? He's one of those guys that I feel like pops up on the injury report a fair amount. It's almost weekly at this point. And so if Jayden Reed is able to stay healthy, I think that's going to make this Packers team even more dangerous. And I would expect the Commanders' defense to struggle. I mean, Marshawn Lattimore is a solid cornerback, but again, I talked about the age, and Marshawn Lattimore is getting up there in age, right? Marshawn Lattimore isn't a spring chicken anymore, and I'm expecting that to be who's going to be covering Jaden Daniels or maybe even Matt Golden. Now, Matt Golden's another guy I'm going to be looking for in this game. I would say he had an okay game in his NFL debut, but again, in order to beat a team like the Commanders, he's going to have to step up even more and be a huge factor in this offense. Again, to tell you what I think from this game, I expect the Packers to win this game 31-27. Going into the Sunday NFL slate, the first game on this slate is the Jaguars versus the Bengals. Now, the Bengals are favored in this game by 3.5 points. It is in Cincinnati. I actually expect this line to move a little bit more. I think this line is going to move a little bit more to maybe 4.5, potentially even 5.5 points by Sunday. I know that the Jaguars had a very solid game, I would say, against the Carolina Panthers, but a lot of that I put on the Carolina Panthers. When I was looking at that game, when I was watching that game, I saw week 1 of last year, Bryce Young. It wasn't as bad, but again, he struggled to move the ball down the field, and he just didn't look like he had any confidence out there. And so again, the Jaguars, they were able to run the ball all over the Panthers, and I expect Travis Etienne, who's now the sole running back in Jacksonville, to be able to do the same thing against this Bengals defense. On the other side of this, I am concerned about the Jaguars' passing offense. The Jaguars have struggled in the passing game all of last year, and this past week, they didn't really get what they were hoping for, I'm sure, out of both Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter. And so they're really going to need to have a big game if they're going to want to keep up with this Bengals offense. On the other side of this, Joe Burrow didn't actually have a good game last season, or last week, I should say. If you were going to tell me that Joe Burrow was going to throw for 113 yards against the Cleveland Browns, I would have told you the Cleveland Browns would have won that game. Now, I think they got saved by a lot of mistakes, a missed field goal, as well as a missed extra point. But to me, the momentum the Bengals got from winning that first game, they took a huge monkey off their back from that perspective. They had a 1-9 record in week 1 in Joe Burrow's career, and getting that win in week 1 takes a lot of pressure off them. The last couple years, they've had to play from behind, and I think that actually had an impact on how they actually were playing in games. Now, again, I'm not a big fan of this Bengals defense, but I will say that they actually did an okay job against the Browns, and against a team like the Jaguars have a few more weapons, I would say, than the Cleveland Browns. I like Travis Etienne a lot more than Jerome Ford, and I also like Brian Thomas more than I like Jerry Jeudy. So I do think that the Jaguars offense has the ability to put up more against this Cincinnati Bengals defense. But again, the X factor for me is actually going to be Trey Hendrickson. If Trey Hendrickson is able to get to Trevor Lawrence early and often, I think this game could actually become a blowout game, because Trevor Lawrence has really struggled under pressure. That's been his biggest issue, is when he isn't able to sit there in the pocket and work through his progressions, he generally makes mistakes. And so for me, if Trey Hendrickson and this pass rush are able to get to Trevor Lawrence, I think this could potentially be a blowout. But if that's not the case, I predict this game to be 28-17 Bengals. Again, while you're in chat, while you're here, make sure you chat. Tell me what matchup you're most excited about. Also, make sure to like this stream. Let's see how many people we can get in here. I would love to talk some football with everyone. Also, make sure you subscribe to this channel. I'm on my road to my first 100 subscribers. Let's dive into this next game. Giants versus Cowboys. Now, generally, I think people would be a lot more excited about this matchup, but to me, both fan bases and both teams don't have the most confidence and most excitement going into this year, and both of these teams are coming off of losses, right? I already talked about the Giants losing to the Commanders. The Cowboys lost to the Eagles in what I would consider to be a much closer game than what I expected, but again, they still ended up losing this game. Now, on the Giants side, Malik Neighbors was visibly unhappy with Brian Daboll. To me, I'm not sure if this had to do with the amount of targets he was getting. I'm not sure if he's not happy with Russell Wilson being the starter, which, again, to me, that's also a very interesting aspect of this, is the fact that Brian Daboll will be the starter for the New York Giants in Week 2 against the Cowboys. I don't really understand that. I know that you invested a little bit of money into Russell Wilson, but it was $10 million. $10 million for a quarterback is nothing nowadays. That's low-tier starting quarterback level. There's very few quarterbacks. Like, you're almost competing with backup quarterbacks in that sense when it comes to the amount of money they invested in Russell Wilson. And after what the Giants saw out of Jackson Dart in the preseason, make it make sense to me, Brian. Like, why are you sticking with Russell Wilson? Is there something from a preparation perspective that Jackson Dart isn't doing that you need to see prior to putting him out there? Was there some predetermined amount of games that you wanted to wait for in order to put Jackson Dart in there? Because to me, the Giants' offense looked terrible last week, and I actually understand Malik Neighbors' sentiments in being frustrated about this. Now, What I'm looking for is actually a pretty strong game out of the Cowboys' pass offense. Dak Prescott still has CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens out there on the offensive side, and they don't really have the most powerhouse of a running game. I will say Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders did surprise me, combining for over 100 yards in the Week 1 game against the Eagles. I think the fact that Jalen Carter got suspended in that game is a huge reason why that happened. So I look for the George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb duo to go off even more this week, right? Dak Prescott is still probably figuring out what that dynamic looks like, trying to figure out what George Pickens likes, what routes he does the best on, and then also can CeeDee Lamb bounce back from some crucial drops he had against the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, that was a closer game than I expected, and CeeDee Lamb had the game in his hands in a sense, and he dropped it. I don't think that that's going to be a thing you see all the time from CeeDee Lamb. So again, I think that CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens are going to have really good games. This could be a game where you could potentially see both of them going for 100+ yards in this game and multiple touchdowns. The Giants line is a strong offensive or strong defensive line. Again, but I do see Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders probably combining for another 100 yards in this game. I do think this is a tough game to predict because of the fact that Russell Wilson had the game he had last week, and the Cowboys are still probably trying to figure out how to play defense effectively without the pass rush of Micah Parsons. But I do expect the Cowboys to win this game 23-14 at the end of the day. This next matchup I'm going to talk about, we've got a lot of in-division games early on in the season this year. I actually love it. And this is a game where both teams are looking to bounce back after tough losses. I'm talking about the Chicago Bears are traveling to Detroit to play the Lions. Now, this should be an exciting game because this is an in-division game, again, where both teams are coming off of losses. The Lions lost to the Packers last week, and their offense really struggled. They were able to move the ball a fair amount through the air, but their running offense was abysmal. I did not expect that from Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in this game, and so a huge part of me is expecting them to really run the ball a lot this game. I really expect both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery to get a lot of the touches in this game. I could really see both of them getting 15+ touches because they really need to get that running game going if they want their passing game to be where they want it to be. A lot of what the Detroit Lions do comes off of success from the run. Yeah, they do have solid receivers in Amon-Ra St. Brown as well as Jameson Williams. But to me, again, they still need Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery to be who they should be. Jahmyr Gibbs has the ability to be a top running back in this league. I mean, everyone's really excited, obviously, about Bijan Robinson. Everyone's excited about Ashton Genty. But to me, Jahmyr Gibbs might be the most versatile running back in this league. He has insane quickness, his vision, he's patient, and he can catch the ball out of the backfield, but he can also run with the best of them. And so, again, to me, the key for the Detroit Lions in this game is Jahmyr Gibbs as well as David Montgomery. Now, when you look at the Chicago Bears, right? Caleb Williams really struggled when the Vikings took away the short passes. You saw a huge issue with accuracy when it came to Caleb Williams on the mid to longer passes in that game against the Vikings. And so a big part of me is looking at this and saying, how are the Chicago Bears going to game plan against a very solid defense, and especially a really solid secondary that the Detroit Lions have? I think the Chicago Bears are going to need a huge production out of Rome Odunze. Rome Odunze showed flashes, right? He got a touchdown. He had some solid catches in the first half especially. But again, you don't have Keenan Allen anymore in Chicago. That was an amazing safety net. I've talked about this several times. I still don't understand why the Bears let go of Keenan Allen. When you have a young quarterback like that, having an amazing route runner with also awesome hands is extremely crucial. And their tight end is Cole Kmet, right? Cole Kmet, he's solid, but I wouldn't consider him to be a top tier tight end. And so you need a solid possession receiver out there. And is it Zacchaeus, or is it going to be Roma Dunze who's catching the ball on a regular basis? That's really the big question here, and I think they need to figure that out in this Week 2 game. That's why for me, I really expect the Lions to win out in this game, because I think the Bears have way too many things to figure out. Yeah, the Lions are also still getting comfortable with their offense, but I trust the leadership and the culture in Detroit much more than I believe and trust that in Chicago. Again, the Lions couldn't run the ball last week, but I still believe that they're going to double down on it and try and do everything they can to get Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery going. I think the Lions are just too good of a team. I expect the Lions to win this game 28-20, and probably a much closer game than most people expected. But to me, again, I do see the Lions coming out as the victors in this game, 28-20. Next game we're going to go into, Rams versus Titans. I'll be honest, I'm not very excited about this game. I'm not sure how much of this game I will actually watch live, especially. But a huge reason for that is just the Titans' offense. I wasn't a huge believer in Cam Ward to begin with. I have a huge feeling that Cam Ward got to being the first pick in this draft purely because they didn't see a lot of talent in this quarterback class that came out. I think Jackson Dart is going to surprise some people. And no, I'm not saying Cam Ward is going to be bad. But I also don't think he's going to be an elite quarterback in the NFL. And the sad part of this is it's not even going to fully be on Cam Ward in this game, because his receivers last game, their top receiver had 29 yards. And that was a running back. It was Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard was their leading receiver, and he had 29 yards in that game. The amount of drops you saw from Calvin Ridley and the other receivers in Tennessee, just you cannot have any confidence in this passing offense. I feel really bad for Cam Ward from that perspective. And again, I'm not the biggest believer in him, I'll be completely honest, but I still think he's talented enough to get the ball into these receivers' hands. But at the same time, I don't think the receivers are able to keep the ball in their hands. They just continuously drop the ball. Now, on the other side of this, the running game for Tennessee is not very prolific either. I mentioned the fact that Tony Pollard is their running back. I don't really think Tony Pollard is a huge impact running back. I just don't, sadly. I think he's a decent RB2 on any roster, but when you rush 18 times for 60 yards, that's not enough. You're not going to win games when you carry the ball 18 times for 60 yards. That's an average of 3.3 yards a carry, which, if you do the math, you're like, oh, if you run the ball 3 times, on third down, you'll get that first down. Again, this isn't how the NFL works anymore. This is a high-flying, passing league now. You need to be able to put up a lot of points in order to win games in the NFL now. And so averaging 3.3 yards a carry is not going to do it. Now, when it comes to the Rams in this game, what I will say is I'm happy that Matt Stafford, first off, got his 60,000 yards in his career. I'm also happy that he came out of that game relatively unscathed. It doesn't seem like his back acted up at all, and it seems like he's going to be healthy going into Game 2. I'll admit, maybe this is one of my bad takes. I thought Matt Stafford was going to really struggle this year, purely because I just don't trust back injuries, especially in older quarterbacks. But again, I think the Rams are going to be coming into Tennessee, and their offense is going to be humming. Devontae Adams, he was starting to pick things up. Puka Nacua, obviously, out there. He's a constant for them. Kyron Williams didn't have, I would say, the most prolific game last week, but I expect that to change in Tennessee. I expect Stafford to really be launching the ball downfield a lot in this game. I think this game is going to be an absolute blowout. I see the Rams winning this game 33-10. Again, if you're here, tell me what you think about the matchups this week. What matchups are you most excited about? Love to chat with you. Any questions you have for me, happy to give you my take, good or bad. We're going to be jumping into another division game, right? Again, I talked about this. There's a lot of early divisional matchups in the first 2 weeks, and we're going to be talking about the Patriots and the Dolphins. And again, this is probably another one of those games that I'm not super excited to watch. I do think this is a great game for the New England Patriots to figure some things out. After seeing how the Dolphins reacted and operated last week, I just don't think the Dolphins have any confidence. I talked about their cohesiveness before the season started, and that was confirmed. I actually have even less hope in the Miami Dolphins after seeing what they did in week 1. Tua had 3 turnovers, and that wasn't the complete story, right? They got trounced by the Indianapolis Colts. Everyone had pretty much given up on the Colts when they were having a quarterback competition between Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. No one expected this Colts offense to put up 33 points on anyone, right? I don't think anyone went into last week's game and were like, oh, the Colts are going to crush the Miami Dolphins. I just don't think they were. And that proved to be wrong in this game, right? Again, the Miami Dolphins got crushed by the Indianapolis Colts. And so, again, for me, this is a huge opportunity for Mike Vrabel to build some confidence in this Patriots offense. Very early on in training camp, there's a clip of Vrabel talking to Drake May, and they're talking about the fact that they're like, hey, how many touchdowns did the Patriots have last season? And Drake May didn't obviously know the answer. So Mike Vrabel really quickly followed up and said, not enough. The answer is not enough. And that proved to be true in week 1 again. You saw struggling TreVeyon Henderson in this game. TreVeyon Henderson was very disappointing in the week 1 game. I expected a lot out of TreVeyon Henderson. I know he was a rookie quarterback, but again, to me, you just can't have the type of game that he had and be successful if you're New England. And in the passing game, I was actually pleasantly surprised with Drake May. Drake May threw for 287 yards. TreVeyon Henderson in his rookie debut had 27 yards, right? Keyshawn Butte, he showed out in the passing game for the New England Patriots. They're going to need a repeat of that in this game. I'm not saying that that Miami is going to make this game close, because at this point, I don't have any trust in Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is in the news more for bad things off the field than he is for how he's playing nowadays. That's a fact. I don't know if we've seen the end of Tyreek Hill. I mean, the guy has so much speed and so much talent that he can flip a switch and have like a blowout game anytime. But at the same time, I just don't trust him. I don't trust this Miami team. Mike McDaniel, the coach, he just looks lost. He looks like he has zero confidence. He doesn't have any answers. That's the scariest part. When you watch his post-game press conference, it was very obvious to me that he had zero answers for what was going to happen. And one thing I do know is that Mike Vrabel is going to have this team prepared, right? They are coming off of a loss, but I really expect Mike Vrabel to really dial up this offense as well as this defense and make another really tough day for Tua Tagovailoa. I really do expect that, because if Tua's not passing the ball downfield regularly to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, this could be another blowout game for the Miami Dolphins. It really could. I'm looking at this game, and again, neither of these teams were impressive, but I still have a lot more confidence in a team like the Patriots than I do the Miami Dolphins. I expect TreVeyon Henderson to really have a good showing in this game. I think they're going to have to double down on TreVeyon Henderson and get this run game going to help out Drake May. I expect the Patriots to win this game 21-13. We got a couple more 1 o'clock games we're going to be going into, and then obviously we'll dive into the 4 p.m. and then the 8 p.m. games. And obviously I'm talking about Eastern time here. But the next game we're actually going to be diving into, I'll be honest, not the most exciting matchup. I'm talking about the 49ers are going to New Orleans to play the Saints. Now, the biggest story to me when it comes to this matchup is the fact that George Kittle was put on IR. And this is just another shot to the 49ers offense that just really scares me. And I'll say this, luckily for them, they have a very easy matchup in their week 2 game that can help them try to figure some things out and how to operate this offense without George Kittle. Because, again, they already are without Brandon Ayuk, and now they're without George Kittle. Ricky Pearsall, he surprised me. You know, he had a 100-yard game last week, and he's going to need to continue to do that throughout the next couple games. But I do expect him to have a really good game against the Saints. You know, you're seeing a quarterback battle between Brock Purdy and Spencer Rattler. You know, Spencer Rattler sometimes can move the ball down the field, but he still struggles to get points on the board. And that's something that I think the 49ers are actually really good at. I think the 49ers always find ways to get into the end zone. And so I just don't trust the Saints team to be able to get enough points on the board. I really don't. I think Nick Bosa and going up against Calvin Banks, the rookie left tackle for the New Orleans Saints, that's probably the most exciting matchup in this game. Nick Bosa, he is a great pass rusher. I don't think people talk a lot about him enough just purely because the 49ers struggled last year. But if the 49ers can turn things around, which I'll admit from my perspective, I didn't see that coming this year. Again, we're only in week 1, so things can change. And again, they have a lot of injuries that are going up against them. But Calvin Banks, the tackle for the Saints, he had a really good preseason, and he also had a really good first week. I think this left tackle D-end matchup is probably going to be the most exciting part about this game is how does Calvin Banks do against Nick Bosa? You know, how many sacks does Nick Bosa get? Because if he's able to stop Nick Bosa, Calvin Banks, you know, the Saints could actually make this game interesting. I don't expect that to be the case. I'm not saying this is going to be a complete blowout. Again, without George Kittle, I see the 49ers still having to figure out how to operate this offense without their key weapons. You're going to need a big game out of CMC in this game. He's going to get a lot of touches regardless just because there's not a lot of options out there. I expect the 49ers to win this game 20-10. That's really where I see this game going. I don't think the 49ers are going to absolutely, you know, blow them out of the park, but at the same time, I think they're going to have a double-digit win and leave New Orleans pretty comfortably. Next matchup we're going to talk about. Next game we're going to get into is the Bills at the Jets. Now, the Jets showed me in week 1 that they are not a team to be taken lightly. They very easily, and in my opinion, controlled that game against Pittsburgh. I think the Boswell 60-yard field goal was like the miracle that Pittsburgh needed in order to win that game. But again, I was extremely impressed with how the Jets played in that game. They did actually just cut their punt and kick returner, Antonio Gibson, and so they probably see that as the reason why they lost this game. He had a key fumble that led to the Steelers being able to get some extra points on the board. But to me, I think that this is going to be a much tighter game than people expect because this is being played in the Jets' home stadium right? And I know the Bills travel really well, but again, I think the Jets actually had confidence after that game. Even though they lost, I was watching Justin Fields in his press conference, and he was acting as if the Jets had won that game when he was talking about the game after, right? He just had this swagger to him. And to me, I understand why. To me, this was Justin Fields had the best game, probably the most consistent game in his career. He had a 72% completion percentage last week. And he also had 50 yards on the ground, right? So he was passing the ball accurately, and he was able to get yards on the ground. Like that's a great recipe for success. Again, they are playing the Buffalo Bills, and as a Ravens fan, I'll say this: you can never count out Josh Allen. Josh Allen just seems to be on a different level. He completely willed that game against the Baltimore Ravens. The Buffalo Bills fans left really early in that fourth quarter, and Josh Allen made them regret that. I think Josh Allen is going to be the deciding factor in this game is how he performs. I think he's the X factor because James Cook he's a solid running back. He gets into the end zone fairly often last year, but this entire team is based around Josh Allen. There might not be a single other team that is based around another player like the Bills around Josh Allen. Like Keon Coleman, he's a solid receiver. He had over 100 yards against the Ravens. But again, a lot of that had to do with the fact that Josh Allen extended plays and made some amazing passes downfield. Like there was a tip touchdown to Keon Coleman. Dawson Knox tipped the ball and Keon Coleman caught it in the end zone. So it wasn't even a target for Keon Coleman originally. But Josh Allen, he just finds ways to create opportunities for this team to win the game. So again, for me, a big important aspect of this is how the Jets' defensive line play against the Buffalo Bills' offensive line. Because the Bills were able to keep Josh Allen upright for most of that game. The Ravens' pass rush really struggled against this Bills' offensive line. But I actually like the Jets' pass rush more than I like the Ravens. I think the pass rush of the Jets, it's really young, it's physical, and they have speed as well on the edges. And so that's going to be a huge factor for me. I would really consider the X factor for the Bills to be this offensive line. I'm also really curious to see how Keon Coleman does against Sauce Gardner. Again, I talked about the fact that Keon Coleman had a 100-plus yard game against the Ravens. Sauce Gardner is going to want to get his revenge. He didn't have the best game, I would say, against the Pittsburgh Steelers. DK Metcalf wasn't explosive by any means, but he's probably mad that they still lost that game. And so that's also going to be a really exciting matchup for me to see in this game, is how Keon Coleman plays up against Sauce Gardner. The other aspect on the other side of this and why I actually have more confidence in the Jets is I wasn't impressed with the Bills' defense. Now, I know they were playing against the Baltimore Ravens, who have probably one of the best offenses in the league. I think they had the number one offense last year. But they were getting ran all over by Derrick Henry. What I will say on the other side of that is the fact that they did show up when they needed to. At the end of that game, they forced a fumble from Derrick Henry, and they forced some crucial 3-and-outs that gave the Bills enough time to come back in that game. And so whether or not the Bills' defense can step it up is going to be a huge factor in whether or not the Jets are able to stay in this game. I expect the Bills to win this game 27-17 at the end of the day. I think the Jets are going to have a pretty solid game, but this Buffalo Bills team, they're my Super Bowl favorite, and I expect them to come out of this game 2-0. While you're in here, again, I posted in chat, tell me which matchup you're most excited about. Also, make sure you like this stream. Let's get some more people in here. Let's talk some football. We're going to be diving into, I would say, a less of a divisional game, obviously. I'm going to be talking about the Seattle Seahawks playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we'll get into that in a second. again, while you're here, make sure you comment in chat. Tell me which matchup you're most excited about. Make sure you like this stream. Let's get some more people in here. Let's talk some football. Diving into the matchup between the Seahawks and the Steelers. Now, I think the easy take is that the Steelers are going to win this game at home. I'm not 100% sure that's going to happen quite yet, though. I do see Sam Darnold having a similar type game. I don't think he is going to figure it quite out in Seattle quite yet. A lot of that has to do, to me, is the fact that he really only has one solid weapon in this passing game. It is Jackson Smith-Njigba, who I am a huge fan of. But I do think that this is going to be another tough game for Sam Darnold. What the Pittsburgh defense showed me against the Jets is that this is a formidable defense. I was really concerned about this Pittsburgh defense going into it purely because of just how old they are. We're talking about TJ Watt. I'm not expecting him to fall off quite yet, but he's getting up there in age. He's 31 years old. You also have Cam Hayward, who I believe is 35, 36. He's 36 years old, right? That's old for a defensive tackle. They're without defensive tackle Derek Harmon. Derek Harmon is out, right? He sprained his MCL against the Jets, and so that's a huge aspect of this line that's going to make a big impact. But I will say Jalen Ramsey looked amazing in that game against the Jets. And I will say, even though the Seahawks passing offense doesn't look scary, Jalen Ramsey is going to need to have another game like that from just like an overall aggressiveness and just running to the ball, right? I'm not saying he's going to have to go out there and cover someone one-on-one. I'm not exactly sure he's going to be I don't think he's going to be covering Jackson Smith-Njigba. I expect Joey Porter Jr. to have that matchup. But I do expect the Seahawks to really invest in the run game in this game. In order for the Seahawks to have any chance in this game, they're going to need to have a big game out of Charbonnet and Kenny Walker. Like, both of those running backs are going to need to combine for at least 130 yards if the Seahawks want to have any chance in this game. Now, Charbonnet, he had 47 yards on 12 carries last week, which is a 3.9 yard per average, 3.9 yard per average carry. Kenny Walker had 10 carries for 20 yards. Obviously, that's a 2 yards per carry average. That's not going to do it. Kenny Walker was supposed to be a workhorse, and he's had really solid seasons, but if he gets off to a slow start, he's one of those running backs where he needs a lot of carries in order to get going. Derrick Henry is a similar type running back. He was not like that against Buffalo, but Kenny Walker is one of those guys where the more carries he gets, the more dangerous he is because he's a big running back, he's physical, and he just leans into defenses. Like I said, the Steelers' defensive line, one, they're old, two, they're without Derek Harmon. So if Kenny Walker can just get in there and just rush and rush and rush, that's going to be the best chance for the Seattle Seahawks team to win this game. I don't see them being able to win this game in the air. I think the secondary of the Pittsburgh Steelers is going to be too good for this passing attack. And again, Sam Darnold, he had 150 yards last week. He had close to a 70-yard completion percentage, but when you have 150 yards, that's just not going to do it. He didn't score a single touchdown or have an interception, and so he's going to need to get more production. He's going to have to put points up on the board himself. Again, if the Seahawks want to have any chance in this game, I think this is going to be a pretty close game purely because I do see Mike Macdonald, who's very similar or very familiar with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was the defensive coordinator for the Ravens before he went to Seattle, so he knows how Pittsburgh likes to operate. So I do think it will be closer than people expect, but I still expect the Steelers to win this game 17-13. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, but I think Aaron Rodgers is going to find a way to overcome Sam Darnold, which is probably a very obvious answer. But I do think the Steelers are going to win this game. Next game we're going to go into, this is actually the last 1 o'clock game on the slate. And we're going to be talking about the Cleveland Browns versus the Baltimore Ravens. Again, another division matchup. And in this game especially, this is in Baltimore. The Ravens are favored by 11.5 points in this game. Now, I myself, as a Ravens fan, I will tell you, I am still licking my wounds from Sunday night. I'm still not over that matchup, and I really hope the Ravens are feeling differently than I am, because at this point, I don't have the most amount of confidence in this team when it comes to maintaining leads. I do expect the Ravens to have a big lead in this game, but at the same time, what I will tell you is this is a divisional game, right? Myles Garrett, he has the Ravens' number a lot of times. They're also competing against their former elite quarterback, Joe Flacco. I think every Ravens fan is excited to see Joe Flacco out there. Obviously not in a Ravens jersey, but seeing him in M&T Bank, I think there's a lot of Ravens fans that are probably going to be giving him some cheers. No, I don't think that any Ravens fan would want Joe Flacco over Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson is a two-time MVP quarterback, and against the Buffalo Bills, he played an amazing game. I was extremely impressed with how he played. I will say on the other side that Joe Flacco did play, other than the turnovers, a pretty decent game against the Bengals. It wasn't prolific, but he was managing that game pretty well besides some of those turnovers. Not all of them also were his fault, in my opinion. There was a drop pass that got tipped right into a Bengals' hands, and those are just things you can't control. Now, overall, I do think this is the perfect game for the Ravens to gain back some confidence. Again, you're at home, you're in a divisional game, you really need this win because both the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Bengals won last week, and you do not want to get behind in divisional games because that's going to cause a lot of problems, right? The Browns are 0-1 and 0-1 the division. The Ravens are also 0-1, but they don't have a divisional game yet. So this is a huge game for the Baltimore to be able to gain some confidence back. Now, on the Cleveland side, something I'm really curious about, and I haven't heard anything yet, I'm assuming that means that we're not going to see him out there, but I still got to talk about the fact that Quinshon Judkins is potentially eligible to play in this game for the Cleveland Browns. I think that would be a huge pickup for the Browns if he is able to be out there, because you saw a terrible performance out of Jerome Ford. Jerome Ford did nothing for that Browns offense, and so you need to have that young running back out there sooner rather than later. I haven't heard anything about whether or not he'll be suspended. Adam Schefter himself said he doesn't expect there to be a suspension, considering the fact that the domestic violence charges were dropped against Quinshon Judkins. I don't expect the NFL's investigation team to find something that the police did not find. So there is a chance that we actually might see him out there, but I haven't heard a decision one way or another. He did recently sign his deal. Maybe the Browns want to give him some time to get acclimated to the team and get back up and running before they put him out there on the field and risk an injury, right? Because it does take time to get into football shape. So that is a key aspect to think about when it comes to Quinshon Judkins. On the Ravens side, I do expect them to play angry. I think they're pissed off. They're sick of losing these games like this. I watched Kyle Van Noy's stream. He looked lost, but I think going into the week, that feeling of being lost is going to turn into anger. I really do expect the Ravens to play angry this week. I think Derrick Henry is going to have a redemption game. He had a really good game against the Bills. He ran for like 168 yards and got into the end zone. But after that fumble, he said it himself. He's like, put that loss on me. This loss is my fault. I don't think it's his fault necessarily. I actually put that loss on Jair Alexander and the poor play calling they had at the end of that game, right? I don't understand why you run an end around with a 5'10", 180-pound soaking wet receiver like Zay Flowers just for him to lay down before he gets hit, not even getting back to the line of scrimmage. Some questions I do have about the Ravens, though, is Isaiah likely going to be back out there? And also, are they going to get fullback Patrick Ricard back? Going into last week's game, I actually thought the Bills were going to win that game purely because I think the Ravens, key to their success a lot of times is Patrick Ricard, their fullback. That guy is such a crucial player for them. And Isaiah likely is proving to be even more important. Lamar Jackson was passing the ball down the field. Zay Flowers had an amazing game in the receiving in the receiving side of things. I think he had 148 yards receiving. He's actually the top receiver in the NFL right now. But Isaiah Likely needs to be out there as well because Mark Andrews was seemingly a ghost out there. I think he had like one catch. It might have been for a first down, but it wasn't a big play. It was very early on in the game, and then you just never saw Mark Andrews again. And so you need Isaiah Likely out there. Isaiah Likely is a great tight end for them. So I'm really curious to see if we see both of those players out there for the Baltimore Ravens. Again, because they have a bad taste in their mouth, both teams are coming off of losses, but the Ravens culture is just completely different from Cleveland, right? Cleveland is known as the factory of sadness, and they just don't have the weapons out there. I have the Ravens winning this game 23-14. That's really where I see this game going. I think it'll be 23-14. We're going to be diving into the 4 o'clock slate. So halfway through, everyone. Now, this next game, it's the Broncos at the Colts, and I think there's a lot of people that are very happy with how the Colts played last week. But I'll just say this straight up: the Broncos defense is just way too good for the Colts to have a repeat performance. Again, they played really well against the Miami Dolphins, but again, I've talked about this. I just see a terrible culture and no cohesiveness in Miami. I think they're just a team that's on the downtrend and is about to get rebuilt. So to me, can Daniel Jones look like another Pro Bowl quarterback out there is the biggest aspect to this game. Because he did that against the Dolphins, and again, I didn't expect that. He's going to need to be able to do that against Denver in order to have any shot in this game. Bo Nix didn't necessarily have the best game himself last week, but they were still able to find a way to win against the Titans, purely because, in my opinion, the Broncos' defense, though. Cam Ward couldn't move the ball down the field. They just couldn't get points on the board. And so, again, to me, this is going to be a Broncos defense-dominated game. I just can't buy into the Colts quite yet either. I need to see another performance from Daniel Jones to really have any sort of confidence in this team. Again, they had a good game last week, but I just need to see more of it. What I will say is if Jonathan Taylor gets 100 yards and a touchdown in this game, that tells me they found a way to go up against this Broncos defense. I think Jonathan Taylor is the X factor in this game for the Colts. But still, at the end of this, I do see the Broncos winning this game. I think it'll be a lower scoring game. I expect this to be around 21-10, Broncos winning. The next game we're going to go into, this might be the game of the week. Tell me if you're excited about the Eagles playing the Chiefs in Kansas City. So this is a Super Bowl rematch. Now, I'll start out talking about this game from one perspective, and I think it's the fact that the Eagles received good news in the sense that Jalen Carter is not going to be suspended for this game. After spitting in Dak Prescott's face, he did get kicked out of that game. He is getting a fine. He's actually going to be playing for free for the Eagles in this game, but he is not suspended for this game, and I think that's going to be a huge factor. On the other side of this, I'm really concerned about what this passing offense is going to look like for the Kansas City Chiefs. Travis Kelce, he did get a touchdown in that game. It was a pretty long touchdown. I believe it was around 35 yards. But that was really all he did in that game. I know it was a touchdown, so that's great. But it was a scheme play. There was not a single Charger defender around him. And so what that tells me is there's either miscommunication on defense or Andy Reid just schemed up a perfect play for Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is going to need to have a really good game in this game if the Chiefs want to have any shot at winning this game. They're going to be without Xavier Worthy, who dislocated his shoulder running into Travis Kelce, and obviously Rashee Rice is still going to be out with the suspension. And so Travis Kelce and Hollywood Brown have to be the answers. Like Juju Smith-Schuster, he's still somehow a serviceable wide receiver for the Chiefs. Like Andy Reid must just love Juju Smith-Schuster. Andy Reid has like certain players like that. Has anyone ever noticed that about Andy Reid? Like Kareem Hunt is a perfect example of this. Kareem Hunt is still out there, Most teams would not invest any money in Kareem Hunt, but Andy Reid makes him look like a potential Pro Bowl running back year after year. He stays ready, and Andy Reid just has his types of players, his guys that he's like, hey, I have you on speed dial. If I need you, you're here. Kareem Hunt's still out there regardless. I will say I'm also concerned by the fact that Isaiah Pacheco didn't have the most impressive game last week. Isaiah Pacheco, he's like the little engine that could for me. That guy just keeps his feet moving at all times. And I don't know if it's necessarily the Chargers defense that did this to him, or if it's the fact that, he just didn't have the best game. But he had 5 carries for 25 yards in that game, right? So that is a 5-yard average, but he only ran the ball 5 times. Patrick Mahomes was actually the leading rusher in that game. Patrick Mahomes ran the ball 6 times for 57 yards. He also got a touchdown. Here's the other aspect of this, and I think it's obviously important to talk about this. Patrick Mahomes, whenever he's out there, your team has a chance. Patrick Mahomes is just so good. There are so many plays where the Chargers could have made that game a blowout, but purely because he's Patrick Mahomes, he was able to keep the ball rolling, and he was able to stay in that game and make that a tight game against the Chargers. Another aspect I need to talk about when it comes to this Chargers offense is Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown looked like a possession receiver out there. That's supposed to be a speedster big play type of receiver. He's not a give me the ball 10 times on slant routes or out routes and let me go get you a first down type guy. He always has injuries. And I love the fact that he had 10 catches for 99 yards against the Chargers. But the biggest question is, can Hollywood Brown keep that up and stay healthy? I'm not 100% sure about that. I have my doubts about that. Again, I loved him when he was on the Ravens. But again, the last time he was on the Ravens was like the last time he was healthy for like a full season. And so without Rice, without Worthy, the Chiefs are going to have to count on Hollywood Brown to go out and get these first downs for them, especially if Travis Kelce gets off the slow starts. Again, I talked about Travis Kelce. He had 2 receptions in that game for 47 yards. One of those was 37 yards. So his other catch was 10 yards, right? If you take away that touchdown catch, you're looking at this game saying like, wow, like Travis Kelce's lost it. So you're going to need to get production out of them. And then again, Juju Smith-Schuster, he had 5 targets. He caught all 5 for 55 yards. So he's going to have to maintain that again. I think Juju Smith-Schuster, along with Hollywood Brown, are going to be the X factors in this game. Now, I haven't talked a lot about the Eagles, so I'll dive into them now. But for me, with the Philadelphia Eagles, last week Jalen Hurts actually outgained Saquon Barkley on the ground. He had 62 yards. Saquon Barkley had 60 yards on the ground. So that's totaling 120 yards between the two of them. But that's something you probably don't want if you're the Philadelphia Eagles. You have an MVP caliber running back, and you're running your quarterback more and gets more yards than Saquon Barkley. I don't really understand that. And I think in order for the Eagles to win the game the way I expect them to, I expect a lot out of Saquon Barkley this week. I really do think you're going to see him running the ball early and often in this game. I also am curious to see what happens with A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown was non-existent in that Week 1 win against the Cowboys. He had 1 target in that game. He caught it. I just don't see that happening again. A lot of people forget about last year before the Eagles were a Super Bowl winning team. There was a lot of drama on this in that locker room around getting targets to Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, a lot of people, if you remember, was caught reading books on the sidelines, and people took it as like, oh, he's bored because he's not getting the ball, and he's showing that by reading a book. Apparently he brings a book every single game, but to me, Jalen Hurts needs to get the ball into A.J. Brown's hands. Jalen Hurts is an amazing quarterback. He is a great leader, and so you need to start using your weapons more and save your legs, because this is still week. This is just week 2. There's so much game left. And so, again, I don't see A.J. Brown having the game he had. I also expect Saquon Barkley to have a bigger game in this game. Now, the biggest thing is going to be, how does Trent McDuffie play against A.J. Brown from that perspective? Trent McDuffie is a great cornerback. I just think A.J. Brown has the edge in that perspective. I think A.J. Brown is a all-pro caliber receiver. And again, I think he's going to come out of this game and he's going to play angry based off of like what happened in week 1. I think the Eagles CBs might actually have their hands full in this game. I really do. I think the Eagles, they struggled against the Cowboys, and even though I talked about those injuries, again, Juju Smith-Schuster and Hollywood Brown can be serviceable wide receivers for the Chiefs. Like, there is a definite possibility for that. Now, going into what I actually expect from a final score, I'm going to give the win to the Philadelphia Eagles in this game. I think it'll be closer than what that Super Bowl matchup was. I expect the Eagles to win this game 28-21. Last game of the week. I'll actually, just so you know, I'll save my Monday night football games for my Monday live show. Just to remind everyone, I do go live every Monday and Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. On Mondays, I'll talk about the Monday night football game and recap the games from Sunday. And then on Wednesday, I dive into the Thursday night football game as well as the Sunday slate, giving my predictions, giving my takes, telling you what I think about these teams. So make sure you tune in for those lives. Again, I'll dive into the Sunday night football game. This is the Falcons and the Vikings. Now, this is another matchup between two second-year quarterbacks. And so I'm really excited about it from that perspective, because one thing I'll say is, like, side note, I'm really excited to see where this class ends up in 3 to 4 years. I think there's a potential for this class to end up being one of the best classes in the quarterback position in a long time. I really do believe that. And so seeing a game between J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix is going to be a great matchup very early on in these careers. Now, there's a lot of similarities, in my opinion, when it comes to Michael Penix and J.J. McCarthy. Mainly the fact that both of them didn't play a lot in their rookie seasons, right? J.J. McCarthy just went up against Caleb Williams, who started his entire rookie season. J.J. McCarthy played his first game last week. Michael Penix played 3 games or 4 games last year. Now, what I will say is I was completely wrong about Michael Penix. I had my doubts about him because of the fact that I just didn't see him play enough, and when he did play last year, I wasn't extremely impressed with him. I'll be completely honest. I really didn't think that Michael Penix was the guy. Now, what I saw out of Michael Penix in that game against the Bucs was that guy won. He wants it. Like, that guy is a player. That rush he had for a touchdown to keep them in the game and give them the lead was insane. Like, he dragged that defender essentially. There's like a screenshot, right? A still shot of where Michael Penix was when he had his legs wrapped. And the fact that he was able to get into the end zone, like, he had to go like 7 yards in order to get into the end zone on that play. And he was able to make it happen. Now, one thing I am concerned about when it comes to the Falcons is the fact that there is an AC joint injury for Drake London. They are considering him day-to-day. And so I am worried about if he's going to be able to be out there, because what you saw last week was Bijan Robinson was essentially a receiver for them. Like, Bijan Robinson had 100 yards. He had 100 yards like receiving in that game. I don't expect that to necessarily be the case this week, because I do think they're going to want to use him more on the ground. I do think that Bijan Robinson will have something like a 60-yard rushing game and a 60-yard receiving game in this game. I think he's going to have somewhere around 120, 150 total yards, and I expect him to get into the end zone, potentially twice in this game. Now, J.J. McCarthy on the other side, what I will say is he had a very slow start. I don't think he was necessarily panicking, but he wasn't making quick enough decisions. The Bears' defense were also just getting in his face pretty early. But what he showed in that fourth quarter is he has the ability to be a great starter in this league. He had 3 touchdowns in that fourth quarter, and everything I saw out of him after that game was just exuding in confidence. Like, he just looked so confident. He looked like a warrior out there. His face was just so intense, and that's something I love to see out of a quarterback. You do not see that all the time out of quarterbacks. And J.J. McCarthy is just a winner. He has a winning pedigree. I talked about that in a video after Monday night. He went to IMG Academy. That's a football factory. And then he went to University of Michigan and won a national championship. And so seeing this matchup between Michael Penix and J.J. McCarthy is a really exciting one. The Falcons lost a heartbreaker last week, right? They had the ability to win that game, and their kicker, Koo, who to me is probably one of the more clutch game-winning kickers I've seen out there. I can't tell you how many videos I've seen of Koo kicking insane field goals to win games for the Falcons. That was very unlike him. And so I know this Falcons team is hungry. They competed really well against the Buccaneers, which to me is a very not unrespected, but people are sleeping on the Buccaneers a lot, in my opinion. And so the fact that the Falcons kept the game the way they did tells me how talented this Falcons team is. Now, when it comes to important players, I think Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason are going to be huge factors for the Vikings in this game. The Falcons defense is a pretty solid one. And so if they're able to get the ball, if they're able to rush against this Falcons defense to give J.J. McCarthy more diversity in this offense, I think that's going to be a huge factor in this game. I think both of them combined for at least 100 yards and a touchdown in this game, right? And so I actually see this being a close game, but I actually expect the Vikings to win this game 20-7, right? I think this is going to be another heartbreaker for the Falcons. I really do like both of these teams. Penix, again, I didn't have the respect for him that I should have going into this season. He threw for almost 300 yards last week. I don't know if he'll be able to get 300 yards this week. I think the Vikings defense is just that good. They had a slow start against the Bears, but they really figured things out in the third quarter especially, and then the fourth quarter were just lights out. So, again, I think this is going to be a close one, but I actually expect the Vikings to win 20-17. Now, that's it for me for the slate of games. Again, make sure to comment in chat. Tell me what matchup you're most excited for. Do you have any questions for me? Any takes that you want to hear from? Again, I'll give good takes. I'll also give a lot of bad takes. I'm here to have a lot of fun. Let's build an awesome community of football fans here, guys. Again, I'm going to be doing live shows every Monday and Wednesday starting at 1 p.m. Eastern Time to go over the upcoming slate of games as well as reviewing past games, any sort of news that's going around in the NFL. So again, if there's players you want to talk about, teams, whatever that looks like, tell me in chat, comment. Make sure you like this stream. Also, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Again, this is a very new channel. I'm trying to build this community up. It would really appreciate it if you would help me out there. That's it for me today. Again, this is Bad Takes with Bad Takes in Football, signing out.